For those that I haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Abby Schwartz, and I'm faculty in School of Social Work here at ECU. I also coordinate our gerontology programs. And I, along with Biva Das, who you can see there as well, in the Department of Kinesiology, we co-chair ECU's College of Health and Human Performance Aging Well Together initiative. So it started this fall. So the film festival is something that has been a long time in the making. We're super excited to have all of you here today for our first feature film of the initiative. And we would like to thank, of course, our Aging Well Together committee for their efforts in planning these events, our continuously supportive Dean, Anissa Zonkovic, who developed the film festival idea as well, and Kelly Rusk, who we could not live without. She is our university communications person. She made that beautiful website, the social media, just a few things to name a few. So for those of you who aren't super familiar with the Aging Well Together initiative, our purpose is really to advance the science and practice of gerontology through collaborative research efforts and to educate and serve ECU as well as the greater community in aging-related events and programs. So of course, because of the pandemic, we've mostly done virtual talks on various topics in practice, but also research topics. And we also had an aging symposium. So please look at our website for the recordings of that. If you'd like more information about our initiative or events, you can contact us at healthyaging@ecu.edu. Biva is going to type that address in the chat for you. And today I am going to moderate the panel. We're super excited to have the director of the film 95 and 6 to Go with us. Her name is Kimi Takesue. You'll correct me, please. She is also a professor at Rutgers University, Newark at the School of Arts and Sciences. And we have Dr. Rashmita Basu, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Public Health at ECU as well. So I gave a super brief introduction of our panelists, but I would like each of you to just kind of tell us a little bit more about yourselves as well. Maybe Kimmy can kick us off.
Oh, well, I'm a professor at Rutgers, as you said. I'm a filmmaker. I've been working in a number of different genres. You know, I work in documentary as well as narrative and experimental and kind of hybrid forms a lot of times. So there's sort of experimental documentaries that I've been more focused on because I can be much more self-sufficient in terms of shooting the films. And so while this film 95 and 6 to Go is a little unusual for me, I've never done a personal and family oriented film. And it's a little bit more conventional in the sense of it being, you know, ultimately a portrait. But, you know, it's a film that's an example of making work that's very, very intimate and sort of handcrafted and again, quite self-sufficient. So it gives me a lot of freedom in terms of, you know, the making of the film. But basically a lot of my other films, I would say as a kind of overriding theme, I'm often interested in cross-cultural encounters of different kinds. So in this case, it's interesting because it's not really a cross-cultural encounter, but it's also, you know, I guess I'm interested in that idea of people coming together from sort of different worlds and from points of difference. And so in this case, even though we're within the same family, you know, there's an intergenerational difference. And so the film is very much about that kind of connection and in some points, you know, like collision or difference, and us kind of, you know, coming to some sort of understanding and connection. So those are just some of the broad themes that I work with, but it's lovely to be here. And thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so pleased to share the film with you. So thanks to everyone for making it.
Great, thank you.
So I'm Rashmita. So I'm in the Department of Public Health here at ECU. And thank you so much for the invitation and such a lovely film. I really, really enjoyed it. And, you know, although my background mainly in, you know, health economics, health services research, or public health. But a major focus of my research, and I'm passionate about it also, the caregiving for older people. As people get older, how their health and economic perspective change. And I could certainly relate so many factors, so many things that, that while I was watching the film, right, that was like the intergenerational relationship and how those relationships shape over the course of the life, course perspective, and how that impact people, health and well-being, their quality of life and their care needs, right? I mean, people get older, and then part of my research, I focus on, the caregiving for older people, and majority of the time it's just family members who come forward and, like provide that care to their loved ones. And I mean, the research to great extent, it says that, well, family members, they are willing to provide care out of from their obligation, their appreciation to their loved ones. And they feel like, I have an obligation to pay back something to the person that I love in my family. So it's so much, you can relate those, health and care needs to those type of family relationship. And I also pretty much like the perception of being positive in life, and that's so much into, I mean, we may not think about that way, the emotional well-being, or we may want to focus on, well, we have to stay healthy physically, not emotionally or mentally. But there is a strong connection that, as people get older, it's not only all about the physical health part, it's the mental or emotional. And there you can see the role of the family members, not only your spouse or, the intergenerational members that can come together, and the way they can shape the, well-being for the elderly. So I could pretty much relate that what I do in my research, looking at all those different aspects of life and health and other well-being and consequences as people get older, and how those personal relationships can impact those aspects of different dimensions of health and well-being. I really, really love that film. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit right on the nose with a lot of things that probably many of us connected with in the film. And whether you're a practitioner or you do research or you're an actual caregiver yourself, there was a lot of places where you could make that connection. So I certainly felt that way as well, and really appreciated that component of the film. I'm so glad that you both introduced yourself a little bit more, so that our audience, our attendees, know a little bit more about each of you. And what I would like to do is, I certainly have questions. However, I would like to hear from those who are present. You can type your questions in the chat. And I would love to hear from you first regarding your questions that we can field, and I'll moderate that and see what you have to type. So please start typing away. Don't be shy.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to discuss any aspect of the film. I know that, we're speaking within the field of gerontology and aging, but I'm also happy to talk about any other aspects of the film, sort of creatively, or, creative choices, structurally. So feel free to ask really anything that you're interested in.
So what I'll do is I'll kick us off here, and just start with, what prompted you to make this film?
Well, the process was a little bit unusual in this film, though in some ways I often work without clear agenda or expectation. So my process is often in a sort of gathering mode, and then kind of discovering a film through time. So just to give you a little bit of background, I mean, I grew up in Hawaii as a child, and then my parents divorced. And so I moved with my mother to Massachusetts. And then I'd go back to Hawaii in the summers, and sometimes I'd stay for a longer period, like when I was a teenager. And so I had a really close relationship with my grandparents. They were really central to me. But my grandmother was really the central figure for me. And she was the one that I had a very close relationship to. And my grandfather existed really much more on the periphery. I really didn't know him very well. And I had a lot of preconceptions about who he was. For me, he was the serious one. He was the practical one. He never expressed any like creative interest to me. He always was the sort of more stern one that was like, asking me what I was majoring in college and, what I was going to do for a job. And so I kind of like tiptoed around him some. And I just didn't think he was very interesting, And so I think one of the main things I learned in making this film is how easy it is, to underestimate and overlook people, and especially elders. But in my case, it was particularly my grandfather, because they did have a pretty separate relationship. And so once, as you saw in the film, they both read the screenplay, but this alone was a big surprise because they had never taken interest in any of my other films before. But I think the fact that it was this cross-cultural love story and that there was a Japanese character, they felt a sense of connection. And so my grandfather surprisingly became so animated by the script. And it was like all of these new dimensions surfaced. And so you see how, especially when it goes back in time and he's a little younger and he's so excited by the idea, and he's generating all of these new ideas and titles. And so I was so surprised to see this, these new aspects of him surface. And so that's when I started the filming process. And it was really just me responding to this kind of new person who was emerging. And then the majority of the film takes place, after my grandmother's died. And it's the first time that we spent alone together in our entire lives. And we're spending, and it's interesting what you were talking about, Dr. Basu, about obligation and stuff. And so I'm there to sort of help him in different ways emotionally. But as you can see, he's really much more the caretaker in lots of ways for me, because he's so self-sufficient and he's so capable, right? He's like really active. But certainly we were both kind of in these modes of sort of emotional limbo. I was in this mode of sort of limbo with my project and dealing with the loss of my grandmother, and he was in this transitional state dealing with loss. And so we were kind of caretaking one another in different ways. But the majority of the film takes place then. And so we're alone together. And it was through the filming process that the kind of camera became this catalyst in a lot of ways for these conversations to emerge. And for me to see him much more clearly, it's almost like with the camera, it really focuses your attention. Now, one thing I just want to say is that you see that one scene where he's, kind of reprimanding me, like, what are you going to do with this? And don't show this to anyone. And in fact, he was really adamantly opposed to ever showing the material to anyone. And he actually said to me, if you ever show this to anyone, I'll disown you. I'll never forgive you. Wow. And it was very interesting because on one hand, he's so uncensored and so unself-conscious, but occasionally he would snap and just be like, you can't show this to anyone. So I was gathering this material, but honestly, I never thought I was going to make a film because he was very clear about that. And I would never violate that. And I never would, after he passed away, violate that. But as you see at the end of the film, he has a change of heart about, I think, his sense of legacy and about the film, because he's coming up with the title of the film about him. And so it was at that point after he died that I was then considering, okay, maybe there is a film here. Now people ask me, they say, well, why would you continue to film him though? And like I said, it was connected to the ways in which the filming process kind of, allowed me to see him and appreciate him more. And it, like I said, it became the kind of catalyst for us to have conversations and connect in ways that we hadn't before. So I really think it gave me some kind of, impetus in a way, but I never really was thinking in any way about a final product. So I was never looking at the material. I never applied to any grants. I never showed anyone the material. So it was only after he died that I had this material And then I look through it, very slowly. And of course, the first consideration is, okay, this might be of interest to me because it's my family. But will it be of interest to others? Because we all, perhaps have more interest in our own family members than others. But then I made the decision. It was like, I really want this as a document for myself, my family, and and also just the sense of kind of the Japanese Americans that are so distinct in Hawaii that I wanted to somehow kind of preserve. But I really had no expectation for the film to necessarily circulate much. So that's kind of the answer to it. It was a very kind of organic, slow process. And, this whole film from beginning to end was like a 10-year process. So it was a long process of 6 years of shooting. And then the editing process was very slow because, again, it was kind of like going back, looking at material, and just sort of having intermittent, moments between teaching that I could concentrate on it.
Wow, that's incredible. And actually, we had a kind of a filming question from, I believe it's Kayla Robinson. She asked, how difficult was it to continue filming after both deaths, or, even after your grandfather passed away?
Well, so the filming process really stopped, after he passed away. There are a couple of things that I did in terms of exteriors, but everything, of course, he was gone, and the house was sold quickly by my father, and but in terms of course, I missed my grandmother an enormous amount. Like I said, she's someone who was so central to me while I was growing up, and really I was very close to her. I mean, she was really like a good friend. And so it's like I didn't really, the process of filming him after that loss, though, was not difficult in the sense that it was this mode of like discovery, that it was like, oh, there's this other person that I've completely overlooked, and now I'm getting to appreciate. So I think that process was pleasant and rewarding for me.
Okay. I'm gonna kind of bop around a little bit. So I'm curious what you, as well as Dr. Basu, think. So an increase in life expectancy has certainly opened the door for more intergenerational relationships. So how do you think we can continue to involve older adults in our future endeavors?
Do you want to start with that, Dr. Basu?
Yeah, sure, I can try. So I think one of the things that I was going to say that it really came through in my mind watching the film is that what independent, as you were talking about, like his character is, he seemed to me is someone, when we talk about in the health, in the world of healthcare, like, person-centered care, right? Which is basically, well, respecting the person who is their wish, their preferences, things like that. So it was reminding me that, yes, I could relate that. Yes, he was such an independent character. He wanted to, he could envision that how he wants his caretaker to be in the future. Like, so that's really an aspect that I could definitely relate that. So as your question also, how we can involve the family members. So I think this is one of the things, that the perception of the having the person in the center of the attention. If as people get older, they may need care, and that there's the role of family member, comes into the play. But then the idea of having that person in the center of the focus, meaning that to respect the person, what he wants, he or she prefers. So basically, respecting the needs and preferences for the person that who is needing the care or support, for that matter. It's really important. That's not only for, the physical well-being, but definitely for the mental well-being. And it's such a connection between physical and mental well-being for the quality of life as people get older. So, it's, I mean, we always try to think about, whether from the physical perspective, but we try to relate that to the quality of life from that perspective. But I think it's a mental aspect. To me, I feel like as I mean, focus more and more in this intergenerational relationship and caregiving and people, needs and support for the older adults, it feels to me that, the mental health and the emotional support is sort of seems to be the more important for someone's quality of life, or how they can perceive their life, how they enjoy the positive experiences in life. That plays a more, important role than physical status or physical health to some extent.
Mhm.
But I definitely think that, from the intergenerational perspective, it's just for the quality of relationship, or the relationship from, among the family members that's are being engaged to different variety of activities, for example. So that's something also, help having the positive experiences in life. And but definitely some aspects of the life course perspective that also plays an important role in that, how people go through from one phases in life, from early adulthood to the as they the elderly phase and things like that. So
Yeah, just following up. I mean, I think that so often, we think of older people in the context of, deficiency or something. And like I said,
yes.
one of the things that is surprising in this film is how capable he is, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how he remains physically very, very strong. I mean, the reason I open with that shot of the push-ups, right, for that long period is to
Yeah.
establish very clearly his perseverance, his grit, his toughness, because it's such a defining characteristic, right, that really kind of uh, is seen throughout the film in different ways. He has, though, an emotional limitation, though, right, as part of that kind of toughness. Like, he's clearly developed a certain survival mode that you learn about through his history in
Mhm.
terms of so much loss, and that he had to take care of himself and his father, and really has been in that survival mode, taking care of his family. So it's interesting because on one hand, he's such an example of someone who really has such a rich interior world, in the sense that he really is busy with daily activity that he treats with intense focus. Everything he does, right? Whether it's going through the coupons with such intensity of focus, or his cooking or watering. And I think that's one of the reasons why he really, I mean, he was not someone that I was ever aware of ever being depressed, for example. I mean, he really kept himself occupied, um, and had a world of ritual, right? And of all of these tasks that really were kind of fascinating if you pay attention. I think it's just a reminder, like, if you give anything attention, it can be really, really satisfying or interesting, but we're all in a kind of distracted mode. Um, but the place, speaking to sort of what you're saying, Dr. Basu, about the emotional kind of lacking, I mean, the place where he has that deficiency really is emotionally, because he clearly has not been able to bond really with people emotionally because of his experience, and the fact that the over riding concern for him is this fear of dying alone. That's the emotional thing that he is so afraid of. It's not really that he minds being alone while he's okay, but the idea that he would die alone and what that says about who he is is just like, that's what really seems to haunt him. So, I think it's like, yeah, he's a very, very, he's very complicated in that sense of kind of being so self-sufficient and capable, but in other ways emotionally very lacking. And just one other thing, one of the things that I found so interesting is in his ideas about the fiction film, right? There's a lot of projection that happens. He integrates like some of his own concerns into his ideas about the script, but also that he interjects it with such sentimentality and nostalgia. So, in his imaginative world, he's incredibly sentimental and romantic, but is so incapable of expressing that within his own life.
But he I think at the end it was really nice that he was trying to offer the happy ending. So that that was absolutely.
Well, there's a reason why, we like that, right? I mean, it's like, especially in times like this, right? It's like, but also just the fact that, beyond that he had a kind of, a business acumen in a way, and just like sort of more commercial instincts. I just found the way that, you can see in the film at a lot of points his mind, like,
Absolutely.
like,
And also the other thing also, I found it like, in our research now, people are talking about, especially for, those elderly adults, those who have dementia or some sort of cognitive impairment. So usually, traditionally, people try to look at the deficits aspect of it. But now the field has sort of started shifting towards the positive experiences in life. How can someone be sort of more staying positive and try to experience their day-to-day life, try to enjoy it, even though the person knows that the disease will take its own course, or what's going to be the outcome 5 years, 2 years, or 10 years down the line. But now the field is trying to think about the researchers to do research more focusing on positive aspects of life, positive experiences of life, so that will give the more quality time for the person who is experiencing the disease, although they know that the outcome. So that's also something I could relate that in your film, that it was so obvious that he was such a joy to, just try to experience the positive aspects and try to be staying positive. And
well, I was really amazed and inspired by that will to live. I mean, even as a much younger person, I thinking about his condition, and especially once he has cancer, and like you're saying, the fact that he's, he creates this kind of competitive framework, right, too, of like, is he gonna get past that 6-month point that the doctors have sort of limited him in some way, but he's determined, like he's gonna get beyond that. And the way that he still, had that will, I mean, I just found it remarkable, and it really is a source of inspiration that certain people have that, that drive within them.
Yeah.
So to kind of dovetail off of that, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you took away from your film?
Well, I think it's this aspect of how easy it is, to overlook and underestimate people that we're very close to and that are within our, our own families. And the fact that I really had just no sense of so many dimensions to him in terms of his intelligence, in terms of his creativity. I really enjoyed the time I spent with him. Even that mode of kind of puttering around the house and doing those little things. I mean, I actually love these kinds of just like small gestures of everyday life and sort of the little poetry of everyday life. And just watching him is like, it was very, it was sort of powerful to me to just kind of see his rhythms. So I really think that, for me, it was just this awakening. Like, here's this person that I've spent like all of this time with in my life and thought I had, a fairly good, good relationship with, but I just had no sense of you know, his complexity. And I think too, you know, especially with younger people, right? They get so locked into a very narrow idea of like who their grandparents are. And usually the grandparents are serving in some way their grandchildren, right? And it's like they're modest often. They're not telling and sharing. And especially in the context of my family, Japanese Americans, very modest and sort of humble. You know, you don't brag about things. And it's not to say that he did anything in theory that was extraordinary. But when you look at someone's life, it is extraordinary, like what they've gone through, right? And all of the challenges and obstacles and how they've you know pushed through it. And just even small things like looking at him in terms of his fashion and how I never thought of him as like a handsome man, for example, because within our family, we actually had a lot of internalized racism about aesthetics of beauty. And it was very much like enforced. My grandmother, you know, she had big eyes and she was considered really beautiful. And she always would kind of mock like my grandfather. And he was always kind of, you know, oh, it was sort of like he was not attractive because he didn't have like big eyes, you know? And you know, looking back and seeing his images too, and just the kind of poise and composure and just sense of style. I mean, you can see right in his clothing, it's like amazing. I mean, even like still have some of his shirts, you know, because he had such a great sense of style. I mean, really, young people love this film because he's almost this like hipster icon. You know, that's what he looks like, right? With those huge trucker hats and like, you know, the suspenders and those great colorful shirts. So that's really it. You know, it's that idea that we could have people so close to us and we don't even, we have no idea who they are and, you know, how, you know, what a rich past they've had.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And attendees, just know I'm simultaneously listening. There are so many questions, and if I don't choose your question, it doesn't mean that I don't think it's a great question. It's just that maybe it was answered, or you know, so the teacher in me is coming out. I want everybody to feel that their questions are important, which they are. But I think this question in particular is something that might resonate with a lot of people. So Joanne Lee wrote, "It was truly a gift to view your film, Kimi." She grew up in Hawaii and has parents in their 90s now. So there was a lot that resonated with her, for her personally. She is compelled to document their histories before their loss. So what advice do you have? So in a way that can be, what advice do you have to do so in a way that can be as natural as it occurred between you and your grandpa? So I think, what ideas can you share or advice about how we can capture our older loved ones' histories?
Well, you know, in a way, because my grandfather was a resistant subject, I had to approach this in a very unobtrusive way. So I think, you know, going back to, you know, when we have a lot of like expectation about something, or like if you're interviewing someone in a more formal way, it can be pretty intimidating, right? And it can feel like there's a list of questions and it's hard to sort of get into that other space. But because, you know, so I'm not really like asking him questions so much in terms of like, okay, I want to cover this, right? I'm really just responding to what is emerging and then kind of following up. So of course it's a little different because I'm a filmmaker and I just kind of have my camera out. But as you see, it's kind of that being prepared for what might spontaneously happen. So do you notice that how many of the conversations happen while he's eating?
Yeah.
It's at that point that, you know, he's obsessed with food. He's always eating. He'll return to that place. And in a sense, he's captive there, right? Because he has to sit there while he's eating because he is a busy man, you know, and he is off doing this and that. And he certainly didn't want me to get in his way or distract him from his daily rituals. So that became a place where like setting up the camera, right? It's very easy for us to kind of have a conversation about something. So I think that's just an example. It's kind of like looking, people have pretty consistent patterns in how they do things. And especially when you're within a family and it's a smaller space, right? So you could kind of consider that, like kind of thinking about the sort of natural patterns and when people seem maybe a little bit more relaxed and open, and just being willing to kind of take some time with it, be patient. And I think you'll get into a more interesting kind of conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see, there's so many good questions. Lauren Elder says, first of all, I would like to say how much I love the film. Did the camera affect your grandfather's lifestyle? And I think you started to talk a little bit about this, but he seems so genuine and uncensored, like you said. And I'm wondering if this was a good representation of who he really was.
Well, that was, again, one of the things that amazed me, because I would say that most people are impacted by a camera, in the sense of a change of behavior where people become self-conscious or maybe more performative, right? And my grandfather was completely uncensored. And I think that, again, is one of the things that's refreshing. Like, he really is frank and he's not trying to please anyone. The only time he becomes performative is when he is telling his version of the different endings of the film, because he's performing that like as an idea. And I thought that was fascinating because he's presenting it as though he's telling it for the first time. And yet the reason I could intercut it that way is because he's telling it in exactly the same way each time. So I could, it's almost like word for word how he's telling it again. And so I found that very interesting, that kind of performative aspect of, like, the idea being generated and him kind of, delivering it and performing it. But otherwise, he was completely uncensored. And I think that's why I found him to be so fascinating, because I think that's very, very rare. I mean, most people really want to give what they think is a good impression. And I do feel like, of course, I was very conscious of trying to show him in his various dimensions. And I think, there are aspects about him that are unappealing, in the film. I think one of the things that's fascinating to me is how people seem to, in a sense, rationalize or excuse like some of his behavior. And I think it's very gendered. I think that if it was an older woman, I don't think it would be the same. I think this idea of like the kind of, grumpy older man at times who's saying things that he doesn't really mean, that are negative, for example, about my grandmother. I mean, he says some really harsh things about her. She didn't have any interest. She didn't, and people sort of dismiss that, like he doesn't really mean that. No, he does mean that. He really does, And I think that that's fascinating, because in a sense, it's kind of, the film is very much too about the construction of narrative, how we tell the stories of our lives, which are contradictory and changing. And then, of course, there's this filming process that's being written, that's a romantic love story. And so, it's like, even us as viewers have the tendency to project romance onto what we're seeing. Like, oh, they really were in love. Well, not really. They weren't, I mean, there was a lot of separation between them, but we as an audience want to believe that they're connected and maybe, can't express it. So I find all of these layers fascinating.
Yeah, and I think it shows the complexity of human beings in general, but also when you look at romantic relationships in the way that your grandfather described it, that's not unusual for that cohort. That was, my grandmother and grandfather who have since passed. My Nana, it was funny when your father said, or was it your mother would fall asleep, or your grandmother would fall asleep on people at the movies? So my Nana, same thing, until she met my grandfather. And I said, why did you marry him? And she said, he had potential. And it became a love story, but that wasn't always the case. So I think it also gives a glimpse to younger viewers who might have a different view of what, romanticism is like, how there are these cohort differences there.
Well, I also think too, what was I gonna say? Sorry, the phone just.
That's okay.
I'll come back to it. I know. Okay. So one of the things that was really important to me in this film, like I said, it's about the sort of construction of narrative and how we tell the stories of our lives. And those stories change at different moments of our lives, right? So people often ask me, well, why didn't you do this film chronologically? But I thought it was so much more interesting to have my grandfather describe my grandmother, and for him to construct a very particular, identity for her that we as viewers believe, right? Because why wouldn't we believe it? And yet when we see her, it certainly challenges and contradicts
Yes.
his version of their meeting of the story, of how they came to meet and what the sort of situation was. Because I want you to be aware of the constructed nature of everything, the constructed nature of the film, the constructed nature of our memories in lots of ways, right? And that they're subjective and they change. And it's not to say that he's, like lying, but he's also at a different place in his life and he's thinking back on it very differently, sort of after her death. But I'm doing that very intentionally to sort of make you aware of the fact that there is no sort of single, consistent story.
This is from Aaron, and it's not, well, there is a question in there. It's not a question so much as a comment, but I'm mentioning this partially because I agree with him. He was tickled about how present and engaged your grandfather was in taking care of himself, cutting the plywood board with a handsaw. What was he making? And then he said, cooking steak over charcoal in the garage, rigging up the firecrackers with a long string so he could pull it over the trash can. Clever. And I had similar thoughts to Aaron as well. Do you know what he was making when he was cutting that plywood?
Yeah, he was making he was doing shelving like in the house.
Okay.
And I thought that, I mean, the different examples that Aaron gave, I mean, they're all terrific in that, part of what I was amazed by was my grandfather's resourcefulness, which is clearly kind of a byproduct too of his background and kind of growing up through the Depression and the fact that it's like, you don't take anything for granted and you're scrappy and you make do, but also this wacky like inventor side of him that would come up with these different little crazy concoctions or little, for example, with the firecrackers. I mean, it was amazing. It was like, I mean, we didn't discuss that or anything. He just said, I guess because I was visiting, he got the firecrackers. And then the fact that he rigged that up, so that the firecrackers would drop into the trash can so that it would not be as much cleanup, and that he's got this rope. And I mean, and again, with the hibachi, doing the grilling, and he's got the fan and he's got the coals, on another burner that he's bringing in. And he has like this whole ritual and the different things that he's built, for his exercising to sort of stay upright. I mean, I found all of this amazing, that he, again, that kind of creativity. I think it's too this idea. I mean, so much of the film is about how the fact that, there's so much untapped creativity, and there's also so much like overlooked creativity. The fact that my grandfather had all of this creativity that I didn't know about, both as a storyteller in the sense that he had this imagination for kind of story, but also the creativity again of daily life, of kind of like, creating these little sort of inventions that are really amazing, especially when you just think of our lives of just intense materialism and waste. I really admire that.
Yeah, I did as well. And thank you, Erin, for that. And so for both of our speakers, I'm wondering how the themes of the film could inspire younger generations to continue to invest and learn more about their own history and culture, even if it's different from your background, Kimi. So
You want to start, Dr. Basu?
Yeah. I think a couple of things. First is, of course, the family relationship. So that's really, I feel like that I could relate that, a lot of in our field in the gerontology and the health services research connecting, and then lot of work is like motivating on how the family relationship impact those as people get older, their health and well-being. So it's not only, of course, the resources and healthcare and all aspects of this, they are there, but the relationship among the family members. So, and that I feel like that it was so perfect and it was so prominent there. And also that sort of promotes also being positive, staying positive in life. And definitely that is something we can, the one of the things that I feel like I could relate that to the literature that we, sort of saying, well, those type of things that can impact one's life and help people to age well as they get older. It's aging, it's not necessarily has to be like, negative outcomes or, as we think about, oh, we are getting older, so we'll have this problem or that problem. But it also like, being well and aging well as we get older. And that's something the younger generation that, those really family relationship, family bonding. And the other thing also, I feel like, the one aspect is that everything is connected. I mean, what we experience in our younger, when we are young or in our earlier life, that definitely has an impact on as we get older. So, it's not, like as a, even the research, there's so much focused on the life course perspective, saying that, well, as a childhood, what we experience in our childhood, we may not think that, well, when we get 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, how does it matter what happened in when I was in 10 years old? But it's definitely has an impact on as we get older. So, it's just looking at the aging process as in throughout the lifespan. That's something like when your grandfather is talking about, that those early life experiences and, how he felt about, I mean, even the relationship with his, your grandmother. And I agree with you. I mean, we as a viewer, we want to accept it as a, no, it's not a good relationship. It's not these in positive ways, but he was very candid about it. And that, I feel like that definitely has an impact on, how he perceives that relationship and on his well-being and health and everything. So.
I think that, again, there's often this sense of sort of like obligation that these are things that you do. Oh, you should learn about your grandparents, or you should, but really, again, I saw how interesting and beneficial it was. Like, it's not like a favor, to sort of do this, like to pay attention. It really is a flip in the sense of how rewarding it is for me, right, as a younger person, to kind of have that curiosity to learn about my own family, to learn about, like in this case, a very distinct generation of Japanese Americans in Hawaii that I think for most people, if they're not from Hawaii, it's a surprise, right? It's like they're very different than the Japanese Americans on the mainland, because the majority of them were not interned. And the irony is that the Japanese American population was the biggest in Hawaii, proportionately, much more so than on the mainland. And people were more connected to Japanese culture even. But the reason they weren't interned is that, and Pearl Harbor happened in Hawaii. So, but the reason they weren't interned was that they were so central to the economy that the economy would have collapsed. But because they didn't go through that particular trauma, they're very different in terms of personality too. And they remained connected to Japanese culture in a more kind of demonstrative way than like, the Japanese Americans on the mainland who were so traumatized and so silenced. Mm-hmm. And I think just even the preservation, right, of this distinct group, like seeing them on film and hearing the way that they speak and the way they decorate their homes. And, so that's kind of a generalization. But then it's like literally like preserving the home. For me, this home that I have so many memories from growing up and being able to kind of go into this home and revisit with these people that I love. And it's like this, I can watch this film just over and over again because it's like revisiting, my grandparents and their home. So I think that a lot of times it's sort of in the context, like it's like something we should do or something, but I really see it as like, wow, I mean, don't miss out because you're going to regret it if you don't, because there's just so much to gain. It's so like fulfilling, and there's just so much wisdom that people have who are older, on all these different levels. I mean, certainly on the most basic level, he told me to get a job. I got a job, as a professor eventually, and it worked out well, like, thank God, it's like, because I needed that self-sufficiency. He knew that I needed, it's like, I needed to be able to take care of myself. And as hard as it is to get some of that advice at different points, right? It's like this person has acquired, a life of experience and knowledge. And so for me, it's really about like tapping in to what you can benefit from as well.
Yeah, it was surprising that he was telling you that you needed to get a job, and like
I did get when I was visiting him in hospice, I got my first assistant professor job at Syracuse. So I was able to show him my card, and he was so relieved.
I'm sure he was super, super happy.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at our time, and I'm amazed that it's already 7:24. I do want to end with just each of you kind of sharing with us what you would like all of us to have as a main takeaway from watching 95 and 6 to Go.
Well, I think for me, I kind of have said it in different ways, as far as just, again, the importance of, I don't know, just the kind of curiosity. I mean, I think when you really pay attention, obviously it's like to the person, to the details of their life, I think there's so much to learn kind of. I'm so fascinated by spaces too, like how someone, creates a space for themselves. What are their daily like patterns and rituals? But to like pay attention, right, to sort of what's around us, the people that are around us. And, again, because there's just, it's so enriching. And I think so often, people regret it when they haven't paid attention and look back, and they don't have that opportunity anymore. So I would really encourage people in different ways to reach out, because I think, going back to that kind of modesty, I mean, sometimes it's hard, like on what sort of becomes the sort of starting point for a conversation or something. But I really think that, people often underestimate themselves as well. And they don't think they have anything interesting or important to sort of say or share. And they certainly do.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's the two things I would like to mention. One is, valuing the family relationship and culture, learning them, and, appreciating the value of intergenerational relationship is one. And the second thing, I think is staying positive and be positive. And I feel like having the feeling of, enjoying the positive experiences in life, even though we get older or, face no matter what circumstances life brings, but being positive, staying positive, and try to enjoy the positive aspects of life. That's a key takeaway that I feel like I could definitely connect those to what I do in my research and, like data and all these things, but it's so vivid in the film that I said, yes.
Well, thank you both of you for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. And now I'm going to kick it over to Biva Das, who's going to kind of wrap us up here.
Well, what a great way to end this evening. I wanted to thank both of you, Kimi and Rashmita, for your time and information that you've shared this evening. It has been most interesting to have you both join us tonight, and the hour went by so quickly. We hope all of you will join us tomorrow at 6:30 for our second film discussion over the film Life and Death in Assisted Living. Panelists will include Amanda Biggs and Laura Jett from the Mideast Commission Area Agency on Aging. And then Saturday is our last film discussion, and it will be at 1:30 p.m. And the film is When My Time Comes. And our panelists will include NPR's Diane Rehm, Dr. David Grube, who is the Medical Director of Compassion and Choices, Joe Fab, who is the director of the film, and the film's executive producer, Diane Naughton. We will post the link to the website to access the film links and to register for the film discussions. And then last but not least, please stay tuned to our social media channels for our February Aging Well Together virtual talk. That will be on Thursday, February 25th at 4:30 p.m. Dr. Ann Dickerson of ECU's Department of Occupational Therapy will discuss how to keep older drivers safe on the road. And then our March virtual talk will be a caregivers panel on Thursday, March 25th from 4:30 to 6 p.m. And of course, if you want any more information on that, Abby is posting in the chat our email, and that email is also healthyaging@ecu.edu. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Again, Kimi and Rashmita, we appreciate that, and we hope to see everyone tomorrow and Saturday.
Thank you for having me.
I just have one thing to add. I just put in the chat my website, www.kimitakesue.com. If anyone's interested in staying in touch or learning about future projects, please join my mailing list. And I also put the title of a film, Where Are You Taking Me? That's totally different. It's referenced in the film. He asked me, what about that Ugandan film? And I say, oh yeah, I finished that one. So this is a film that is about a kind of a cross-cultural travel experience. It's very, very different. But if you want to check that out, it's actually on Canopy, and it's free through your public library or through your school. Maybe through your school you could try it. But check that out. But again, if you're interested in staying in touch about any future projects, please join my mailing list. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really been an honor.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been great talking with everybody. Thanks, Kimi, and thanks, Rashmita.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.